This podcast is powered by the pros at Paschal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPaschal.com.
I'd like to welcome in Chris Lowe, ESPN.com senior writer on the McClarty-Daniel hotline. Really excited to talk some college football with Chris. Chris, I got to start with Nick Saban's retirement. Now, you've covered a lot of things in the SEC over the years. How nervous were you when you broke that story? I'd have to imagine that's the most nervous you've ever been as a writer.
Well, I mean, I've been doing it a long time, so I guess that's a way of saying it. I'm pretty old, but yeah, it's one of those stories that you know is going to resonate across the world and for a long time in the college football landscape. So yeah, it was. I mean, I think that one, and going way back when Spurrier decided to come back to college football, are a couple that jump out to me. But I knew sort of his impact on the sport, just how dominant Bama had been under him, and just sort of the way he had set the tone really for college football, that was going to be one that it set off a lot of alarms. I knew he was thinking seriously about it. I didn't know that he would pull the trigger. And but when I got word that day it was going to happen, yeah, it was a little surreal. It really was. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't.
So, Chris, on the subject of Nick Saban, I know one of your recent pieces is about how he can not just help with college football, but really college sports in general. For those that maybe haven't read your article, what are some of the things you can maybe foresee him helping out, changing college football, or at least helping it moving forward in this new NIL and transfer portal era?
At its core, he wants to see the chaos, just working through the chaos on all the different sides. And he doesn't, he says, listen, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not probably as up to date on all the legalese as others in the sport, around the sport. But try to find a way to bring some kind of uniformity, some kind of reform to where you can play the sports and not have all these debates about, players jumping around with no contracts from year to year, signing kids out of high school, with no cap, no salary cap, no contract, no nothing. I think that's what he wants to see. Nick is one of those guys who believes deeply in developing teams, developing players, building, with kids around for a couple of years. Now, granted, transfer rules are what they are. I don't think we're going to see restrictions put on the transfer rules, but if you're going to get money, I think this is sort of where he and a lot of coaches are in concert. If you're going to get money to play for a school through NIL or whatever you want to call it, then there should be some type of something on the kids' end of it, just like there is in NFL ball, because what it's become is glorified professional ball anyway. It has been for a while, but there's got to be some type of commitment on the players' end to stay for so long. If not, just like a coach's buyout, if a coach has a contract, I mean, using real examples, Kalen DeBoer had a $12 million buyout in Washington that somebody had to pay. I'm sure Bama paid it, most of it, not all of it. But that was part of his contract. And I think that's sort of, if we're going to go down the road of paying players and having contracts, then that at least lessens some of the movement, some of the chaos. I mean, there's got to be some type of model. And this is what Nick was saying. Listen, we got to come together and have some sensible conversations and figure out a model that works for everybody, players, schools, programs, that it's a player compensation model where guys get paid, but you don't have sort of this, no guidelines where guys can move around at will. And from year to year, you've got tampering in the portal, you got tampering out of high school. I think those are the kind of things that he wants to see sort of a voice of reform to try to get some of those things fixed.
ESPN's Chris Lowe with us on the McClarty-Daniel hotline. I think in the mind of most seasoned sports fans, you mentioned your tenure in veteran status. We think it's gotten worse, or at least I do. And, Chris, my question is it going to get worse before it kind of rebounds and gets better? All the recent court rulings seem to all favor the players, seem to all loosen the guidelines that don't seem to exist now. Or have we reached what some people would consider bottom on this NIL and portal situation?
I don't know. I mean, you got the recent court rulings in Virginia and Tennessee basically saying the NCAA cannot enforce it's NIL rules, meaning if you've gone and you've paid for a kid to come to school through collectives, or I mean, one of the allegations against Tennessee is that they flew the quarterback in on private jets. Well, those were rules that were put in. Remember, NCAA rules were rules that were put in by NCAA schools and members, and the NCAA enforcement staff goes out and enforces those rules. Well, now the court cases say that's a breach of antitrust violations if you go out and enforce those rules. So we're now in a time period where I think anything goes. I mean, I don't know that there's anything you can't do to try to entice a kid or get a kid to come to campus or get a kid out of the transfer portal. At some point, going back to what you asked me about Nick Saban, all the sides have to come together and figure this out. Whether players are contract employees, whether there's revenue sharing, whether you bring it in-house, a model on how to pay players. But I think what this does is that it expedites the need to do that. I don't, my personal opinion is this: within 2 or 3 years, I hate to give you a specific timeline because I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know that the NCAA will be governing football. I just see some type of break, some type of deal where the biggest schools, the brand name schools, and I don't know what that number is. Is it 30? Is it 40? Is it 48? Are playing their own, their own league, their own governance, their own playoff, maybe a commissioner. They have their own model, how to compensate players. I just have a hard time when you look, as you just pointed out, all the rulings that have gone against the NCAA. It's going to be hard for them to be effective going forward.
Chris, go ahead, Tommy.
So I want to shift the conversation just slightly back to Alabama a little bit, and Caleb DeBoer taking over for the greatest of all time. What is a reasonable expectation for? Are there even such things as reasonable expectation when it comes to Alabama football? And what do you think the landscape looks like for the Crimson Tide's football program the next 24, 36 months?
You had to win every game by at least 2 touchdowns. That's probably. I would say it starts, in all honesty, with making sure they're in the playoff next year, especially where they're going to 12 teams. If there's, if they were to lose 3 games, which probably would leave them on the outside looking in and not get into the first expanded field, then that would be not the best way in the world for Caleb to start out there in Tuscaloosa. So I think it starts with finding their way back into the playoff, and being a team that's, come December, when you're having that playoff, that's a really good football team. And, you could point to and say, hey, if they play well, things go right, they got a chance to be in that Final Four, ultimately playing for a national title. I mean, listen, I don't care who it is at Alabama. With what Nick Saban did and the precedent and standard, whoever, and listen, I've had a chance to talk to Caleb DeBoer. He knows this. Whoever was going to come in behind him was going to face, massive / unrealistic expectations. And he understands that. But, he did have his team in the national championship game last year, only his second year at Washington. They were 4-8 the year before he got there. So I think he's well aware of what the challenge, how steep this challenge is. But I think just being nationally relevant, staying nationally relevant, recruiting at a high level, being a team every year that when you start the season, that you're a legitimate threat to win it all. And when you get to the playoff, especially now that we're in 12 teams, that you're in that playoff. I think that's that's where you start with the expectations. And from there, I mean, you guys know what's going to happen if they go a couple years and don't win a national title or not playing for one or don't win an SEC title. Then even if they are a 10-win team most years and they are a nationally relevant team, and the grumbling's going to start. That's just reality there in Tuscaloosa.
Chris Lowe with us, ESPN.com senior writer on the McClarty Daniel Hotline. Chris, Tommy mentioned playoff there. I know your colleague Pete Thamel talked about some recent developments, maybe expanding to a 14-team playoff. In your opinion, what is the correct number of teams that should be in the college football playoff every year? And do you like the 5 to 7 model that they've shifted towards?
Well, I like the fact that there's going to be more opportunities for teams to get in, the not-so-usual suspects. I like that. I don't think it's going to change, guys, much who wins it. I think you're going to still see the same teams 90% of the time winning the championship, but it does give a few more teams a chance to get in it and play and have an opportunity. It's more inclusive, if you will. Again, I want to be really, really clear, but I don't think it means that all of a sudden you're going to see, Purdue winning national titles, or Boston College, or of course, I'm being, even a school like Texas A&M has a 1-1. I still think it's going to be the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Michigans. Those. I think Oregon is a team under Dan Lanning is a team that's going to be right in the mix every year. But I do think it's pretty cool to see a group of 5 team have a chance to get in, and some other teams. Like you take the SEC. You go back to Sam's really good year at Arkansas when they were 9-3. They might have had a chance to be in that conversation. Ole Miss last year, Missouri last year. A 14 playoff, that's not going to happen. And I think the other thing a 12-team playoff does is think of the number of teams as we go into November that have a legitimate chance to play their way into the playoff. I mean, you're not. Last year as you went into November, you had 7 teams that really had a shot. I mean, you're going to have 20 teams, 15 to 20 teams now as you get into November that have a legitimate chance to play their win. I like that. The other thing I like is the fact that you're incorporating campus sites for the playoff. To me, I'm a big believer in college football is all about playing games on campus. And those first-round games are going to be played on campus. I think will be fascinating. Imagine, Arkansas going up to play Penn State in Happy Valley, or Oregon having to travel to, College Station to play Texas A&M, or Florida having to travel to, Corvallis, Oregon to play Oregon State. I mean, those type of potential intersectional type games in a playoff format are fascinating. I don't want to see it go much larger than 12. I think at some point, if you keep expanding, then it does water down the regular season. It really does. I mean, for instance, if you're a Georgia and you've lost one game, or you haven't lost any games, and you get into November, do you rest players? You're going to be in the playoff. I don't think you would rest players because you're wanting to get one of those top seeds and a bye. But all of a sudden, the month of November doesn't become as big a deal. I mean, think about college football now. To me, November is a great month. Crazy things happen, upsets happen. If those upsets do happen, you're out of the playoff. Go back to that. Was it not 2 years ago, the South Carolina Tennessee game? Tennessee's in the playoff. The only game they lost was to Georgia. They had a really good team. They were still ranked in the top, 5, 4. They go to South Carolina and just get boat raced. And the Gamecocks play the best game they played under Shane Beamer. Tennessee's out of the playoff. And that really sort of propels the Gamecocks to have winning. So I don't want those types of games, those types of upsets, those types of stakes in November to completely go away. So that's why I don't think, in my opinion, I'd like to see it go much bigger than 12.
Well, and think about last year. I mean, we all believe Georgia would have gotten in a 12-team playoff last year. Anyone betting against them being at least in the Final Four if there had been a 12-team format last year? Of course not. We all believe Georgia was amongst the 4 best teams in the country. So that's the other thing. Instead of Georgia being on the outside looking in, they'd probably had a seat at the table when it's all said and done.
No, it would have been. I mean, I still think they were one of the best 4 teams. And, if you want to go down that road, what is it the best, the most deserving, a combination of the two? I mean, I think if you would have polled every Power 5 football coach last year and said, hey, who are the 4 least teams based on what you've seen throughout this season that you want to play, Georgia would have been on every coach's list of the top 4. But that's an argument for another day. But I do think, too, the Big Ten and the SEC wouldn't mind seeing it going to 14 because I think with all this, I guess you're not supposed to call it an alliance, but the Big Ten SEC advisory group would like to have more skin in the game. Maybe 2 or 3, for instance, automatic qualifiers from their conference every year in the playoff. And if you go to more than 12 teams, there's a more likelihood that will happen. A bigger share of the pie. Those 2 schools, because those 2 conferences, those 2 conferences are going to dominate. They already pretty much have, they have a lot of control of what happens right now, and you're going to see that that playoff dominated by teams from those two conferences. Let's be honest. OU and Texas joined the SEC. Washington, Oregon, SC, UCLA joined the Big Ten. I mean, go back and do the numbers from this past year. How many schools, if you had a 12-team playoff, certainly if you had a 14 playoff, would have been from those two conferences. As far as the 5-7, yeah, I think it's good. I do think it's good to protect conference champions. And, I don't know that I tell you what fan bases are going to go crazy about is wait till, I'm not going to pick on one conference, but I'll just say hypothetically, the Big 12 champions lost 3 games. All right, they're going to be a top 4 seed. They're going to get a bye. And let's use your example. In the SEC, that someone runs a table and they're unbeaten, whoever that is, Texas, Georgia, whatever. And then there's another team like Georgia last year that's a great football team that's lost 1 game, maybe to the conference champion, like such as the case last year. Well, that team, in this case, say Georgia, they're not going to get a top seed. They're going to have to play that first round, probably going to be a 5 seed. So you're going to have a team that's lost 3 games, maybe hasn't played as tough a schedule as Georgia, that gets a first-round bye and is seeded out of Georgia. I mean, that's going to be something that fans are going to have to get used to, but that's the format that's in place now in a 5-7.
I am intrigued by some of those college football matchups, Chris, that you brought up this morning. We'll get to see them this upcoming season as it moves to a 12-team playoff this upcoming year. Chris, we really appreciate your time this morning. Again, Chris Lowe, ESPN.com, talking all things college football. Chris, we're still 200-some-odd days out, but I know college football is always on your mind as it is ours, and we appreciate you sharing some thoughts with us this morning.
All right, you guys keep tabs on Bobby Petrino there. I know that's a crazy storyline in Arkansas, but I bet you he does a good job. I'd be very surprised if they're not improved offensively with Bobby there in Fayetteville.
BetOnline is your #1 source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.